I think you'll all do a much better job of introducing yourself and your organizations a little bit more. So maybe what I'll ask is when I turn to each of you with a question and you give a quick summary of your organization's work on just transition, for the panel's understanding. And maybe Dr. Olver, I'll go to you first with a question, because we would be keen to understand a little bit more about your perspective on the business role in ensuring a just transition and financing a just transition, and sort of what a good, responsible business role in that regard is.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And good morning, everyone. My name is Crispian Olver. I run the Presidential Climate Commission. We are a multi-stakeholder body appointed by our president to advise on the journey to net zero. And we base our thinking on the idea of a just transition. A very relevant topic today, and let me give you some reflections on that. So, I mean, obviously, the first role of business is to make a return for its shareholders. And in pursuing that return, they have to do a whole lot of things which have incidentally very socially positive effects. So, businesses have to manage all of their different stakeholders, not just shareholders, but they have their customers, who are vitally important, their workers and their suppliers, as well as the communities within which they operate. And, in many ways, this thinking about the different stakeholders was exemplified by Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum, when he's been pushing this idea of stakeholder capitalism. And I think many of the ideas embedded in stakeholder capitalism are equally relevant when we start thinking about a just transition. It goes without saying that, we can't talk about a just transition without also reflecting on many of the other things that businesses sign up to. So there's ESG, and, embedded in the thinking around ESG is also the concepts of sustainability, the transition to net zero, and yourselves having an emissions trajectory that lines up with that. But more closely to the sort of area, the first and most important concern in the just transition is around livelihoods and jobs. And businesses create jobs, in this new low carbon economy by spotting the opportunities as the world decarbonizes, helping to localize value chains, invest in new technology and enterprises, and to, engage with the various government regulators that have an influence on the space. So, very importantly, in South Africa, we have these industrial master plans for, renewable energy, battery technology, new energy vehicles, green hydrogen. And businesses' role in those master plans is very important. I mean, I know sometimes business rolls its eyes when they see another master plan being developed, but it is the way that government engages in trying to build out new economic sectors, and it's very important that we do that. So, you can be also doing it directly, and you've got this huge influence on your various supply chains. So you can also be supporting your supply chains to spot those opportunities and move into areas. And that's closely linked to skills development. And, jobs and skills really go hand in hand when we're talking about the just transition. And, very importantly, businesses already make a substantial investment in the development of their workforce. In South Africa, we've got this 2% payroll tax, the skills levy, which goes into skills development. And you do a lot around skilling and upskilling. and you play a very influential role through the sector education and training authorities in the skills delivery system. And in South Africa, that's the part that's broke. We've, oddly enough, got, I don't want to say skills development is adequately funded. It's never adequately funded. But our big issue is the institutional blockages around the skills system. And there we need business firmly at the table with government, trying to make that system work more effectively. And, as you well know, the best form of learning is workplace-based learning. So, the one area that we do want to encourage businesses is to open up the workplace and allow youngsters and school leavers and university leavers to get some on the job experience as interns at your businesses. And I know it's a little bit of a hassle, but it's not a very expensive investment, and it makes a huge impact on those young learners' lives having that exposure. Um, and then, we do need to think about the sectors that we're also transitioning out of. And, just as much as transitioning into new sectors is important, also the way that business exits sectors is fundamentally important. So for like the coal miners to be committed to your social and labor plans, to helping workers transition, making sure that all of the social protection measures like unemployment insurance and proper pension funds, and if we needed early retirement mechanisms, I mean, that basket of policies needs to be in place for transitioning out of sectors. So I'll leave it at that. That's like a brief sketch of what I think business should be doing in the just transition space.
No, thank you so much for highlighting both the macro perspective of what needs to happen, but also some concrete suggestions of what does this look like for business and where can business play an important role, both in transitioning in and transitioning out. And Reynaldo, maybe I'll turn to you to follow up a little bit on that, because yes, definitely recognizing a lot of good opportunities with the transitioning in, and also, of course, some complexities and challenging with the transitioning out, which I know in Indonesia has been one of the key issues that has taken up a lot of space in the just transition conversations, for example, related to coal. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on what is the state of decarbonization in Indonesia? Is the transitioning happening? And what expectations do you see locally in relation to a just transition?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for having me here. For the states of decarbonization in Indonesia, I have some data that I need to read in my laptop that under the JETP program, it's already stating that 44% of renewable energy mix by the 2030 we are pushing more the renewable energy pass in. We already have plan to achieve target for net zero emissions maximums in 2060, but we are trying to make it more happen at the 2050. And at the policy levels, I think that's the some of the issue in Indonesia. We still have like a different targets at our national energy plannings. That a difference with our JETP target for renewable energy mix, and the target at the new of our national energy planning is lower than previously. So that is quite a important issue in Indonesia that um, yeah, that we are still working and pushing for our governments. Um, yeah, but I forget to introduce myself more that I'm Reynaldo Sembiring. I'm the Executive Director of Indonesian Center for Environmental Law. That's our organization is actually working with the JETP secretariats. We are member of the Just Transition Working Group under the JETP secretariat. So what our goal is to develop they're trying to develop the beautiful CITP and make it implements. And the second one is trying to convince with all of the multi stakeholders.
It's good now.
Sorry, yes, and the other one is under the working group. We assess all of the projects that's introduced by technical working groups with the transition principles or some of the standards we already have. The second one, our organization is working as well with the local government, particularly with with the dependent co-regions, because we believe that we need the transitions will be happen if we trying to start with from the ground like that. So the local government, we are trying to develop their plannings, medium plannings development, and also we are working with the local CSO to empower the community, because I think it's related with your questions. This is some of the gap of the narrative at the central government, national level, and with the local government, and also with the community about the just transition. Community, particularly for the workers, for the local community, they don't until now that we are working at the East Kalimantan and the South Sumatra. That's the coal dependent regions, the biggest coal dependent region in Indonesia. Have no idea about what is the just transitions and about their rights. So that's the part of us as the working group JP to trying to bridging until the community, and also that's our part as the NGO to develop or empowering them. That's the first thing. The second one, I back to the data that yes, even though we have like a beautiful targets, 44% renewable energy mix in our JETP, but still, for the next year, we around 5.6 gigawatt coal plants will be deployed on the grid in the next years. So it's we have a political will. We have some of the programs, but it's step by step. It's not to running fast. So yes, is one of the important things from Indonesia, and not to mention unclear roadmap to retire captive plant as well, and strategy to put natural gas as a transition fuel around 2020 gigawatt until 24. So it's one of the our focus, how to convince our governments that we can believe with some of the our data, particularly from by research organization, from the CSO, from the ISR, for example, and from the others uh, reputable university, that we can shifting from the fossil fuel and from the coal-fired power plants early. And what is the challenge? Yes, I think it's about under the JETP. I think it's about the fund. That's the fund is still slowly. The second one, the challenging is sorry. Okay. Um, Yes, the challenge the another one is in our CIPP. Our CIPP is not too detail how to break down about the project or the money. I think we learned the good example reference from the South Africa, when at the South Africa JP investment plan is like a funding requirement been identified for instance, investing in youth and preparing for the future generation for the transition in the Upumalanga, correct me if I'm wrong, or a region like that. But it's not happen in Indonesia CIPP. That's why we need to trying and learn from the South Africa. We need to make it more details. It's not possible to make it as too generals. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. And I think that's one of the objectives with this panel today, right? That also highlighting some of the practices and approaches and learnings that we've seen in emerging markets and developing economies, because sometimes the funding aspect, but also the local engagement looks slightly different. And it is really important to understand that local context as we make these transitions in a just way. And maybe with that, Fernanda, I'll turn to you, and maybe you can give a quick intro to Natura, and then I'd love to hear a little bit about your views on how the narratives and expectations differ a little bit across emerging markets and developing economies, and maybe the global north. Because I know this is something you've already seen a little bit in your engagement with business partners and suppliers.
Thank you, Thanks, Zanin. I'm Fernanda. I'm leading climate change and circularity for Natura. For the ones that doesn't know, Natura is a Brazilian multinational company producing cosmetics. Our company is very connected with the sustainable vision. We have a commitment to 2030 that it has three different pillars. The first one is related to the protected Amazon and biodiversity and to achieve our SBTI goals. And we are working hard because the scope 3 is the most important part of our inventory. So we are developing a lot of programs to work and to engage our suppliers, and I'd like to highlight at some points related to that. The second pillar is related to human rights. So we are working with a free deforestation network. We are working with a strong due diligence related to the human rights in the value chain. And we are looking for some opportunities and projects to change our 5 most important commodities. For example, we are establishing for a long time an agroforest systems for palm oil because palm oil used to be cultivated in a monoculture, but we are developing a project in partnership with a Brazilian Institute of Research trying to change this material to a kind of more regenerative process. And the third pillar is related to be a regenerative business and to be committed with the circular economy. So we are looking for biomaterials to reduce our plastics in our packagings. We are using a PCR content. We are selling refills for our cosmetics. For the last 40 years, we were the first company in Brazil that launched a refill line. So we are trying to influence our customers to better understand the value of this kind of commitment for them, for the planet, and for the humans that are there. And looking for the biodiversity ingredients, we've been working with local communities in the Amazon rainforest for more than 20 years. We are investing a lot of technology and research and development, trying to use more ingredients from the area and to scale up the bioeconomy. We have more than 45 ingredients in our products, and we have more than 10,000 families working with us in this kind of network. We are generate revenues for them, and we are helping them because we are generating capabilities, because we are not only buying these ingredients, we have presence, we are on the ground with them, helping them to accelerate and to looking for opportunities with other sectors, with other companies. So we are connecting them with the world. We are trying to helping them assessing the money because they are not able to have this kind of access. So uh, it's a very important job that we are increasing in the region. And I'd like to mention that we are selling our products in a direct sales model. So we have more than 4 million women selling our products in Latin America. If we are looking for Brazil, the reality is 50% of them are black women. So we are empower these women to be empowered to have a better life. We have an institute that are helping them with an educational access because sometimes they have no access to education in the country. So it's a kind of mix that we are facing in this business.
Thank you. And maybe a short follow up, because I know you're working with a lot of these local communities and stakeholders on also enhancing climate resiliency and helping them in the transitions that are happening as you decarbonize. But in your work, sort of also with other stakeholders in the global north, for example, do you see that there are some conflicting expectations and narratives of what just transition means?
Yes, thank you. looking for Brazil as a nation, for example, we have the most renewable energy possibilities if we are looking for the Latin America countries. So, for example, sometimes when we are trying to accelerate our decarbonization journey, we are asking for our suppliers, especially multinational companies from the European side of the world, and sometimes they are offering us something like electric vehicles, but it's not the most important part of our impact. For example, we are using LCA methodology to design our products. We are all the products that we are putting in our technology innovation process. We are using LCA to measure the impact of carbon emissions and the waste generation. So we are calling them to talk about these specific measurements that we are using and inviting them to see the difference, because they need to understand that in Brazil, we have a lot of opportunities looking for these renewable energies. Sometimes we have different options, for example, to use renewable plastics, because we have a good example with a Brazilian company that is the sugarcane renewable plastic. So we are using almost 20% of our plastics are coming from the sugarcane. So we can show them these opportunities. For example, when we merged with the Avon brand, the Avon brand is part of our holding. When they come to our company, they were not using this kind of materials, but nowadays they are using PCR content, they are using renewable plastics. So it's very important for the suppliers and for the multinational companies to see the difference between the countries that they are operating. It's very important. And to look for the people that are working on that, not only for the process, not only for the decarbonization journey. You need to see that are people involved on that. And you need to take care of these people. So when we are starting this journey with local communities, we used to put some suppliers, some different parts of our value chain together with these communities, but we decided to be the third stage on the value chain, but we'd like to have a commitment, an agreement, a long-term agreement with them. So I think the invitation for you, because the next year the COP will be in Brazil. So visit the local communities, see what is happening on the ground, how these people are living, because it's completely different of the European or of the American or Canadian or whatever. It's completely different. And if you are going to Asia or Africa, is different too. We cannot put the global south in the same side, and it's the global south and the north. No, we need to look the difference and to better understand this vision.
Thank you so much. Yes, and I think this local adaptation and understanding of what just transition is so crucial, and also maybe why the stakeholder engagement, social dialogue aspect is such a cornerstone of anything we want to do if we are to call it truly a just transition. And really respect the work you're doing with very close relationships on the ground to understand these impacts. Often another vehicle for really understanding local impacts and getting to sort of the key actions of necessary change can be through civil society organizations working on the ground. And so maybe, Ruchi, I'll follow up with you as you're representing us here from Climate Action Network South Asia. And I'd love to hear your perspectives on how you think businesses can engage with civil society on just transition to make sure that we're understanding where the solutions need to happen and developing solutions together.
Will be
Just try and see if it's on. Hello, good morning, everyone, and thanks for having me here. I'm hearing my fellow panelists, and just to begin with a short introduction about myself and my organization. I am from Climate Action Network South Asia. We are a regional organization which really brings the national level perspectives, the field realities, and try to loop in at the regional and the global discourse. Uh, uh, when we are in the community, I want to first of all focus upon the justice part of the just transition. Whenever I hear about the discussions on just transition, I mainly hear energy transition. I mainly hear where are the targets of moving how much of electricity coming from the fossil based spaces to renewables. But I never hear people's voices, and that is where I want to make my intervention, bringing the justice part within this whole framework. How do we really look at the just transition pathways, which talks about economic diversification, for which there are resources required? And when I mean resources, I just do not mean financial. I mean human capital, the whole idea of reskilling that my fellow panelists are also talking about, and human capital in various situations. I would like to bring in the whole idea of intersectionality, where we have rural spaces, we have coal mine areas, we have an urban area. Interventions you hear from anyone when you're talking about just transition. You hear interventions which are more urbanized. You hear electric vehicles. You hear about, raising vocational training, reskilling more for the educated, the school-going population. What about the people who are in the fossil fuel economy? We are talking about fossil fuel phase out. But when you talk about the transitioning, actually transitioning of those workforce is somewhere getting sidelined. There is a very, very top-down approach is somewhere we see when we are talking about transition. There are plans already in place. I am running a business on a particular thing. I would like to push that agenda in this community, but they have never heard of it. But you need reskilling. Now that's a deal. If you do this, you get a job, or I find more people. So is it just transition? It is only transition away from fossil fuels, probably in some time, but it's not just. It's not with justice. It's not with the people who are really going to suffer at the ground level. And I can clearly give you examples of few of the communities in South Asia, because it is very heavily dependent on the fossil fuel economy. The people are either in the garment workforce. What happens if we just transition to renewables and half of the people lose their job with the new technology coming in? And most of these are women. And there is no other kind of a vocational training or a setup where they have worked. They are working in those mills for generations. Even in the coal mine area, it's a very intergenerational issue. They have never come out of that community. Either they are the workforce in the area, or they are informal people just working around the mine area, selling in small shops like tea or small, food markets or something. So when we are talking about workforce and real social justice, I would talk about two things. One, is it fair? Fair in terms of, is it adequate for the people who are in those communities? Are we trying to learn and finding the new economic spaces or the vocationals which are apt for that particular area, which can be locally mobilized, where people understand what they are getting into? Second thing, is it affordable for them? There are certain vocations which are being propelled by the government itself, but they are very women centric, because small kind of a food product management, and they are not viable to sustain the entire family. When we were talking up to the people in the coal mine area, they said, I would rather go for an illegal coal mining, which gives me 2,000 rupees in just 1 hour by selling a sack, which is illegally taken, than going for 1 month of running around selling pickles. I can't do anything to my children and my family with this kind of a vocation. Let me just do the mining. So, transition has to be legalized, but at the same time, it has to be people centric. It needs to take people's interest in account, and it has to be funded. So, my next point is, with being fair, it also has to be funded with proper education in terms of available opportunities, green jobs, and how these green jobs also becomes an opportunity to break the cycle of poverty, to break the cycle of gender disparities, which are already existing in very fossil fuel based economies, because it's just men's domain. So when we have an opportunity to transition, are we transitioning upon making a more gender just society and also a more equal society? And I leave my intervention at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thanks for highlighting that we're not just talking about a transition in or transition out, but a transition of actual people. And as we do that, we need to consider the opportunities and jobs are decent, are inclusive, and are realistic. And that this can have really big impacts on entire societies and through these impacts. Thank you. And then maybe lastly, Guli, I'll turn to you because you're from the NDC partnership, and I'd love for you to give a quick intro to that. And then love to hear your thoughts a little bit on what do you think are the best proven methods for countries to integrate just transition in their NDCs in a way where it's also implementable, realistic, but yes, of course, really includes the social perspective.
Absolutely. Guli Sabahi, I'm a senior climate finance advisor at NDC Partnership, which is a global coalition of over 220 members, including over 100 developing countries and developed countries, UN agencies, MDBs, and other stakeholders, including civil society, that are working to advance climate action globally. South Africa is one of our member countries, and also, we have South Asia, of course. Indonesia is also one of our member countries, and Brazil. Also, our incoming co-chair from next year. And I also had a chance to speak with Natura because you're members of the UN Global Compact, and we saw each other at the New York Climate Week. So at NDC Partnership, we support countries on developing their NDCs and implementing their NDCs. We're country-led. Countries make requests to us on a regular basis, and the requests range from policy support all the way to developing and implementing certain programs or projects. Just transition principles are embedded in everything that we do. And I think key part of our work is country engagement work, where from national focal points, ministries of finance and ministries of environment, we are supporting country-led processes on the ground to ensure that just transition is taken into account from the outset of any planning, including climate investment planning. And also, we try to regularly collect and analyze data among the countries to ensure that we're sharing the best practices and for the countries to learn and have that peer exchange. I think in terms, I was looking at how we're defining right now the just transition. We will be issuing a new best practices brief. And a just transition essentially is defined in that brief as equitable. So all of the activities that contribute to equitable distribution of the benefits and reduction of the harms of climate action across society, and support socially inclusive engagement and stakeholder processes that help inform and or craft equitable responses to transition efforts, focusing on and giving special consideration to those most impacted by the changes brought about by transition efforts, as well as to vulnerable and historically excluded groups. I think some of the things that we have heard here very much resonated with me, particularly point on the role of the businesses, a role of the local governments, and I think we also should think about, why the climate investment planning, why this industrialization plans are so important to incorporate these concepts, because we want to make sure that the country is not locked up and kind of at the bottom of the value chain. I think that was the point that was underscored by Dr. Olver, really localizing value chains and ensuring that the use of natural resources of countries and the transition really benefits the country as a whole. I think South Africa actually was the first country that incorporated the just transition principles in its international, it used to be called INDC, in 2015. And many other countries followed the suit. And there are many examples now when just transition principles are being incorporated in NDCs. So I think we talked about skills development, decent work, green jobs, social dialogue, social protection and support. I think what is important when we do that planning at the beginning, we need to ensure that we have the right people in the room, both from the government, so that there is that whole of the government approach, a representation from national governments, sectoral leads, subnational governments, whether it's regional, cities, municipalities, but also to ensure that we really foster a whole of society approach, including local communities, civil society organizations, and businesses that play a crucial role in the transition. Businesses have been encouraged to include just transition principles in their climate transition and action plans. But I think it would be very powerful for the businesses to sit down also with the countries and see how the principles on just transition and priorities are actually aligned. Because a lot of those just transition principles and priorities that country sets would have to be implemented ultimately by businesses, whether private sector owned or state owned enterprises. So that alignment and understanding, I think, from the outset is very important, because that will ensure that at the upstream stage there has been proper thinking, alignment, interlinking done that would help reduce some of those roadblocks and misunderstandings, and downstream when the project needs to be financed and delivered. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. And thanks for really highlighting. I think it's fine. I think throughout the panel, we both heard this need for all of the countries in the global south and emerging markets and developing economies are different, and we need to figure out what does just transition mean for each of these countries and regions and communities. But really relevant to also hear some of the tools or ways to integrate the just transition, that where we can really learn across countries and have a vehicle for integrating it systematically in the NDCs. So thank you so much for all of your insights up until now. We have still a couple of questions for you, but I want to pause now because we'd love to hear a little bit from the audience as well. Do you have any input, any questions, any reflections that you'd like to share with the panelists or everyone here? And I can come around with this mic. Does anyone have? Yeah.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the addresses. My name is Aftab Alam Khan from Resilient Future International. I think what I gain from these speeches is that industrial revolution did not only emit greenhouse gases, but it also emitted injustice, inequality, oppression. And if we transit only fossil fuel or greenhouse gas emission and we leave other issues behind, perhaps we would not be going towards a sustainable world. And I think I'll take one example that I recently conducted a research in 14 countries where we found that the poor countries in Asia and Africa, Latin America, they are not only facing the climate justice issues, but they are also facing 14 other issues. For example, rising inflations, debt crisis, conflicts, and many more. But we have seen that those women who are practicing agroecology in the household level in rural areas, they are able to fight not only the climate problems but also the rising inflation. But the problem is that there is no financing for them to scale up. So I think it will be very important for that just transition and business role. I think they are supported so that they are able to conduct a better role towards net zero. And as we know that agriculture is one of the major source of pollution. So I think this kind of thing will be very important. So if you would like to share any light, particularly on NDC side, thank you.
Sure. So I mentioned the climate investment planning processes. As part of that process, the countries are encouraged to do thorough review of their investment needs across the sectors, and then develop clear kind of sectoral pathways, which would include programs and projects that essentially could be financed by the private sector. Then there would be programs that would require blended finance, and then the programs and projects that would maybe still depend more on the public sector. So within each of those programs, it's important for the just transition principles to really be incorporated in determining, the benefits of the program, of the projects, whether they would be distributed equitably, and how to ensure that, for example, local businesses can undertake some of those projects on their own, and that could help them, right, with their revenue, with scaling their businesses. So we really need to think in a very granular level, right, with those principles really guiding how to attract the best combination of financing sources and investments to ensure that local content requirements, for example, not just the requirements, but also there is a preference, given and priority given to the development of those local value chains, the development of the small and medium size enterprises, to ensure that we're also, the examples from Natura, for example, were excellent, thinking about women, how to give them that financial independence. All of that needs to be really thought through. And that's why I think there's alignment between what businesses and how businesses are approaching this and how countries are approaching this, with a lot of input from the bottom up kind of approaches, I think are the way to go. And I just wanted to mention maybe very briefly, we have two tools on NDCs that have a lot of information on just transition principles. One is called NDC 3.0 Navigator that we have launched recently with the support of Bloomberg Philanthropy, C40, UNFCCC, and many other members. And it has a section there with a lot of examples and guidance to countries on how to incorporate just transition principles into their NDCs. And then separately, we also have climate investment planning and mobilization framework that we launched with GCF that also embeds the just transition principles for that climate investment planning and mobilization of finance frameworks.
I'd like to add some comment. Looking for the private sector, from my perspective, I think that we could help the society and the governors to find a different solution. For example, at Natura, we are developing a partnership with an important technology company to generate a kind of social climate vulnerability index that could help the people, local communities, our beauty consultants to anticipate the threats to our network. We can help her then to generate some kind of alerts to prevent terrible disasters. So we will use something kind of Google platform to everybody in the whole country could see the alert, could receive the alert, and could prevent this kind of disasters. Because we are suffering, we are discussing before the panel, we are suffering a lot. The impacts of this climate change are impacting all of us, but we have different conditions to pass through this. So we need to find solutions and to work in a collaborative way to better pass through these situations. So this is an example of project, but I think we could do more of these, because we need to look like for this like an opportunity. It could generate opportunity. It's a good risk, an important risk, but how could we look for all that the things that we are facing as an opportunity and work in this kind of collaborative way and generate opportunities for all the people, because we could include more people and generate income for families that are outside. We are living a lot of inequalities. How could we put them in this economy that you are mentioning.
Thank you so much. And maybe I'll just briefly add to that because I was at an event yesterday hosted by the ILO who were talking about the measure of social protection also being really important for just transition and adaptation. So even what you're talking about with the climate and vulnerability risk, some of the countries there had a registry like that at country level to really understand, well, what are some of the groups or communities in this country that are maybe more vulnerable to climate changes or climate transitions, and how can we be really aware of that and build more resiliency as we adapt to the climate change? I think it's on.
Hello. Yeah. So, just to add to the conversation, I want to bring one more perspective again regarding the kind of interventions we are doing. Sometimes finance is available, but how the finance is utilized at the field level becomes kind of a greenwashing. There is a lot of afforestation happening. There are forest restoration activities happening, driven by businesses, really supporting the change happening at the ground level. But there is no discussion with the indigenous communities, the traditional practices, what will work in that area. There are ornamental plants. There are plants which have no value, which are in abundance put together as a forest. And when you talk to the community, they say, yes, our city has become much green, or my village has become much greener than earlier. But these trees are of no use. The actual trees which were here, my goats used to, graze on them. There was a medicinal value in them. We were completely self-sustained within our own, small village. We never had to have a medicinal requirement from outside because we could make a lot of products as well as medicines from our own trees. But there is a lot of finance being invested in afforestation. Are we really doing good to the environment and to the community? That again, I will come back to the idea of justice. Somewhere interventions are there, intentions are there, but the intentions are not really yielding results and benefiting the people who they should be benefiting. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have anything to add? Or if not, yes? Can you?
Yeah, I mean, on the challenge of financing, which I think is fundamentally important. I mean, I've been very impressed with the work the NDC partnership has been doing, trying to push NDCs into the investment planning space. I think there's a limit to how far you can stretch the actual NDC. And our own experience in South Africa in putting a JETP together is, we used our NDC to, in a sense, set up the country platform that we then advanced. And in thinking about the platform, I mean, what you want to do is plan, so your overall transition, either in a sector or in multiple sectors, covering mitigation or adaptation or both. I mean, I've been very encouraged with what Brazil and Colombia and other countries have been doing with their country platforms. And then you want to turn that into an investment plan with a pipeline of projects coming through. And you want to link that to a realistic financing strategy. And in thinking through the financing strategy, you need, I mean, South Africa, our plan is is going to cost about $100 billion. The funding we got through the JETP was only 8.5 billion. We've increased that a little bit. So the bulk of the money has to come, first of all, from government's own budgeting process. Secondly, from our own private sector. And we need to think about how we use the different components to leverage up the whole capital stack. You've got to think of the plan as an integrated whole. And the private sector has a major role to play in that. So, part of the deal, I mean, obviously we're encouraging the private sector to come in, but we've got to get the governance and the regulatory reforms right to enable them to go to scale. So there's a little bit of, you got to do some homework on your side to get the plan to work and to have the financing strategy be realistic and achievable.
Thank you so much. Yeah, creating a framework for that collaboration, co-creation, shared efforts to get us there. Do we have other questions, perspectives, insights from the audience you'd like to share? Great. Well, I have a couple follow-up questions, but feel free, raise your hand or say a sound if there's something where you feel like you'd love to hear a little bit more from the panelists as well. Maybe one question I'll ask then for all of you, and feel free to chime in as you see relevant or not. But would love to hear your thoughts on how you've navigated the complexities of adhering to just transition principles while also adapting and making these relevant for the specific sectors, local and regional levels.
I don't know if I'll answer the question, but I'd like to share something. I was thinking that all the private sector needs to invest, for example, to have to manage the risk of business continuity. For example, we need to work to construct the more resilient value chains. So why not to do this, for example, generating these kind of opportunities? When we decide to go to Amazon region to buy ingredients from biodiversity, it was a lot of challenge for us because the people there uh, were looking for opportunities to sell something, to have something to eat. So we invested a lot of technology and research to find solutions to buy, for example, seeds, fruits, and some parts of the plant to stand in the forest. Because in Brazil, our main problem related to our NDC is related to deforestation. We have a lot of regulations coming from Europe. That is very good because it's maybe sometimes regulation are helping us to achieve our NDCs, and sometimes some parts of the private sector needs to be regulated to hear and to see the opportunity. But I was thinking that we need to invest to have more resilient value chains, and we could in this journey generate different kind of business and to put more people, for example, to include women working together with us. We have a good example of a international company that are selling shoes, that is Veja shoes, that are buying a lot of ingredients in Brazil. And they are working with the civil society NGOs in the region to include women in their value chain, to put women and to add value to their jobs because they are taking care of the families, and this is an important job too. So they are putting value on that, and if you are looking for the areas that they are working with, the level of the deforestation reduced something like 50%. If we are looking for the areas that Natura is working with, the number of the deforestation is 35% less than the whole region. So why not to do this? And for example, we are buying a butter that is coming from a fruit that's called ucuba, and these trees were sold to sell the wood. So they are cutting the trees to sell the woods to have something to eat. But we decide to study this fruit. We find a good butter to put in our hand creams. So we are buying these fruits, paying more for each family. So they are standing the forest. We are buying three times more than they were receiving selling the wood. So we can we need to see and we need to find solutions. And for example, looking for just transition, we need to maintain these people living in the forest, because they will conservate the area and they could generate ingredients for my industry. Because if they were not, if they decide to leave, or if they decide to live in the cities, we will not have any ingredient, because 95% of our formulas are using renewable ingredients. If I don't have families and people receiving enough money to live and to sustain this family in the forest, I won't have ingredients. So this is why. Because I need to talk like that, because sometimes it's important for the corporations to see the opportunities for the business and how we could generate co-benefits for the families and for the economic side of these discussions.
I'm trying to answer your questions. Actually, in Indonesia's context, all of the just transition principles is already embedded in our policy or regulation or all that. But I think with some unbalancing or unharmonized in our national level with the global demand and with the local level, I think what we trying to manage is with the giving one or two the best examples or raising the important issue. For the examples, like um, we see at our investment plan under the JETP, for instance, that it's not examined, it's not determines or explains more about the vulnerable groups. It's something, it's gaps that we need to fill in. And beyond the JETP, at one of the priority for coal-fired power plant early retirements under the Indonesian JETP program is Cirebon 1 and Pelabuhan Ratu. But we went to the Cirebon 1 and we are seeking some of the crucial issues or the fundamental rights on the fundamental rights or the human rights issue. We are talking about the labor, about the worker in the context of the just energy transitions. But in Indonesia's context, the coal-fired power plants is categorized as the national vital object. And for the all of the company or business under the national vital object is prohibited to make the unions. So it's something challenge or yes issues that we need to answer. We need to be answered because if we want to shake us about the worker rights, we need to ensure first about they can participate, they have the space to be to make the union. That's the first things. Um, the second one is is like the alternative solution or the solution for the local economy in the context of this Cirebon one that we already researched with some of the local CSOs that we find that some of the strategies for the just energy transition, a transition for the local economy is just giving a job for the community, but it's the low positions, just like a security or the. I'm sorry, I'm choosing terms like the low position, but um I'm trying to find the the good but it's the some of the position that is that that's the get a limited wage for that um that is something that we need as my organization have to rise and need to be answered that the transition for the local economy is need to make sure that, for instance, the local economy at the coal-dependent regions, they will be impacted for the local economy, for the local people that we need to make sure about they can secure with, they can improving their capacity first and secure the rights to get the better job. And we wish that they can get, they can involve in the green jobs. Thank you.
Okay. I just wanted to add, I think just a couple of things. You mentioned like, what do you see as kind of challenges. And I think number one, making sure that we're having the right conversation, right? It's important to have all of the stakeholders and this localization of what just transition means and who needs to benefit most and how requires having the right conversations, well facilitated conversations so they don't go out of hand, and that there is a continuity and that we're working towards common objective. There has to be a framework set up for it so that it is done in the right way with the timelines and accountability. And I think also we need to think about the enabling kind of environment to do that, not just the ecosystem, but looking at the existing laws, both national laws, subnational, but also international frameworks on trade, investment, taxes. Is the enabling environment kind of set up to do what we want to do to localize those value chains that we have been discussing? And so and then I think the last part is really kind of coordination. Who plays what role in this, kind of just transition with accountability and transparency. And it's something very hard to do. And I think we need to find and celebrate and showcase the examples where these things have been done well. It's we can all set some perfect goals, but nothing is perfect. We know if something is workable, something delivering the results, I think those things need to be replicated and scaled. And we just need to ensure that we have those frameworks to have the right conversations with right stakeholders. And that's what one of the value adds of NTC partnership is, to bring all of the stakeholders together to foster that collective action and to help countries also move from their NDCs to the investment plans, both economy-wide, sectoral plans, and ensure that there is a community of stakeholders that would be engaged, not just at planning, but also implementing that plan.
Thank you. I would just like to add a little to everybody, whatever they have said. And I would say I see a lot of potential in the business houses to contribute towards just transition in a manner that is people centric. And one of the ways I see is really investing in some social dialogues. We are missing on that. Social dialogues are not happening. We are not really asking different stakeholders what government's perspective is and whether whatever discussions happened here, listening from the people, will it work with them? What businesses are thinking? Will it gel with the government's plans? So the whole implementation plan, which is always the crux of anyone, whether it's a civil society, whether it is a business, whether it is government, are we making that implementation plan for a transitional society in a manner which have the voice of everyone? I think that is a gap I feel, and also an opportunity where if investments come to initiate these dialogues, I think we will be somewhere on the right path. This is one, as a civil society, a gap that I feel, that we talk to business houses, we talk to government, and we talk to people, but we do not talk to everyone together. And therefore, sometimes either the work becomes very top down, or it becomes just redundant, which is happening but not really giving. Everyone is putting in their efforts in their own ways. But the gel, I feel, or the potential, I feel, is where the investment goes in these social dialogues, which are still somewhere missing on the ground. And if we start from there, our interventions, whether we talk about our ambitions NDC or we talk about a climate finance, and all of them really percolating into a way forward that we want to see. I think it will happen if the investment are with the social dialogue. So thanks.
Thank you so much. And I just want to pause to see if there's any audience insights or anything you'd like to add to this. Yep.
Thank you very much. My name is Silla Abram Hakani. I'm within the executive committee of Africa Network of Parliamentarians on Climate Change. looking at this heading, advancing a just business role in net zero transition, it reminded me of South Africa and Lesotho. And I had to think of something that is happening between these two countries. South Africa went into Lesotho to construct a very big dam to collect enough water for South Africa, leaving Lesotho vulnerable of the same valuable resource of life, leaving the community that lives in that country without water. So I'm just thinking whether that type of a business deal is just or not. And thinking when drought strike the whole regime, Lesotho will be the first country to suffer from that type of a drought. And South Africa will be having enough water, but not taking care of the same country, which is just a province to a big country like Lesotho. And now looking at this heading, to all the panelists, may you help me whether that type of a business deal between these two countries is just or not. Thank you.
I think in terms of thinking about justice, there's obviously an intra-country dimension to justice. So we're talking about justice between different classes and different kinds of sectors. So that's very important. And there's also an international component to justice. So justice between countries. And we normally articulate that as a north-south justice issue. So the South carries all the risk in the transition and on the whole didn't cause it. With some exceptions. Because South Africa is a little bit in between. We have contributed a fair amount of emissions over the last century. But what you're raising is a very important point, which is justice, a south-south relationship, and particularly around a really contested resource, which is water. And it's a common. We all keep saying that water will be the next cause of the third world war will be based around water resources. And you're seeing water-related conflicts breaking out all over the place. Just think about the Ethiopia-Egypt standoff on the damming of the Nile. So, I can't comment in particular about the Lesotho Highlands Water Project and the inequities embedded in it. But I think you're raising an important point. And it's something that we should embed in the way that we think about justice. And it does lead me to a broader point, which is about the importance of adaptation within the just transition. Because the way the just transition is being, hammered out in the negotiating halls here, they're talking about this just transition work program in a very narrow sense, which is really about job shifts related to the shift out of the fossil fuel economy. Whereas we interpret just transition to have a much broader meaning. And I think it's got to incorporate adaptation and resilience as an issue. And when we talk about empowering communities, we want to empower them not just with the livelihoods as we move out of fossil fuel sectors, but also with the wherewithal, the basic services, the asset base, the social networks that will allow them to cope with a much more unstable and warmer climate.
I just want to make a very short intervention based on my understanding of your question, that I do feel whenever we are talking about just, what I was emphasizing in my earlier intervention was the social dialogue and how the pathways have been decided, how the step by step consequences as well as positives, both from positive and negative end, are being discussed before any intervention is done. And that is where I would like to say that any intervention which at the end leads to any injustice, even if to start with it began as a justice component, I don't think it is a just transition. And therefore, just transition pathways is something we really need to look at. And social dialogues, proper researching, knowing the implications on the community of any action that we are proposing, even in this whole just transition discussion, is something it is a real need of the hour. And we are right now missing on it, but we all are here from civil society, from government, from UNFCCC, from the parliamentarians. I mean, think through that how we are going and talking about various on-field interventions when we are seeing that work will move towards a better world. But actually, after a point, it becomes a dead end. So if we are again getting into that nitty-gritty, I think it is not a just thing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And maybe what I'll do now, because we're already nearing the end of our session, so I'd love to hear a few final thoughts, maybe just a minute or so from each of you. I feel like we've really centered around this need for collaboration across different sectors in societies, and we're also seeing a very diverse panel representing different countries and emerging markets and developing economies. So I'd love to hear any final thoughts on what do you see as sort of the next steps for your collaboration on this topic and for that engagement? And then after that, I'll bring up Haley St. Dennis from IHRB to wrap us up and do a quick summary of the session. More pressure, Haley. So, do you want?
Yeah, sure. I was just took a lot of notes. It was extremely interesting and valuable conversation. So thank you so much. Really enjoyed it. But I was kind of not kind of writing down what my next steps would be. We're producing this best policy brief, analyzing what has been done in different countries. And one of the things I was thinking that also reflects things that we have discussed here. Number one, role of businesses and the importance of, bringing them also with other stakeholders in a more prominent way. And number two, I think your point about the just transition pathways is very important, and I think we need to have the discussions on the issues on how to structure those pathways, both at the global level but also at country and local levels. So, and then I think we just need to make sure that we're making progress, and we're not just talking about these issues, but we're really taking action, and so that would be really takeaway from my side.
My key takeaways are on three terms. One is societal. Are we doing our work which is people centric and really benefiting the society as a whole? And in all sections, whether it is for rich or poor, whether it is urban or rural, and tribal, indigenous. So, are we taking care of the interventions in a manner that it is really benefiting each and every one and not very skewed towards either completely urban or completely rural kind of a thing? Second is operational. And operational, I mean implementation plan, really working together with the social dialogue, having just transition pathways that I was stressing on, whether our plan of action is in a manner that everybody voices is embedded in it. And lastly, reputational. Reputational both for businesses. I know they have a stake. I know there's a lot on stake for businesses when they are looking at a new thing coming on ground, like Crispian was also suggesting that whenever a new model comes, every new master plan is a kind of a in bracket thing for the businesses. So it should be reputational both for businesses, but also providing decent jobs on the ground for the people. So is it decent enough for proposing such options to people is something I would look at. So the three things I want to take as a takeaway. Thanks. Thank you.
Yes. I'd like to invite you to redefine the concept of progress. How could we think in a different way of the way we are thinking about progress? As human being, we are living a multidimensional crisis. We are suffering with political problems, environmental problems, social problems, inequalities, lack of education. So why can't we think in a different way for progress? And I'd like to tell you something because we are discussing a lot at Natura about uh, a topic that's regeneration because we are thinking that it's not enough to sustain. We need to regenerate and we need to regenerate the relationships between human beings, between us and the nature, between the multi-stakeholder, between everything. So the invitation is to think about that and to recognize the difference because we are different here. We have a lot of different perspectives and we need to recognize the difference and we need to converge because our perspective is not the correct one. We need to see all the perspectives and to find a way to converge. This is my final.
Thanks.
Yes, on from my side that sorry. Okay, I think the just transitions in my side that is important is starting from the grounds. So what we are working now and for the future is um, to working with the broader CSOs to empower the local communities to economy local and also for the workers to ensure their rights to can establish the union for the example for instance for the coal-fired power plants and also trying to convince the local governments to developing the good development planning because we are thinking that for the just transitions idea for some of the idea is need to integrate it need to be embedded in development planning so it can make all of the sector among the sector will be coherent. The second one is because we are under the JP working group. We now is trying to revise our investment plan. As I already mentioned, some of the gaps about there is no statement or no some of explanations detail on the vulnerable group and others. I think it's something that we need to fill in and we need some of the collaboration with the another CSO to raise it. And the other one is very important from the national government side because I think this the important issue in Indonesia context, but I don't know it happens in another country. Is about the state laws. For the some of the just transition, for instance, coal-fired power plant early retirements, how is impact? How can it make some of the state laws? Because in Indonesia, state laws is part of the part of the corruption element. It's something make some of the government's officers, some of the leaders careful to taking a position or going fast to taking a role for the let's say some of the CFVP or the retirement or just transition programs to it. They are thinking about it can make a stake loss for the futures and how is the impact for okay for them. It's something that we need to trying to find the answer. But overall that we believe I believe that just transitions needs to be solved from the least advantaged groups. That's the community, that's the workers, and that's the people that needs to be strengthened. Thank you. I stop here.
Thank you.
Good. Well, a lot has been said. So just one thought to close, and I want to come back to the idea I floated at the beginning around this stakeholder capitalism model, and giving it a new sort of breath of air with the just transition. And I do agree with what was said about the sectoral transition pathways. And I think it would be great to see business in South Africa engaging actively in a series of pathway development exercises. And NBI did some work on this net zero pathways work a couple of years ago, which was really fundamental. But I think the thing to do now is to go deeper and to be a little bit more inclusive in that process and have a set of credible sectoral plans that everyone buys into and which are aligned with where the government targets for those sectors are there.
Thank you so much. And in spite of you all sharing great key takeaways from this session, I'll now turn to Haley Santanas, who is the head of Just Transition at the Institute for Human Rights in Business, to wrap us up.
Thank you so much. Yes, I have the unenviable task of trying to summarize a little bit some of the key takeaways from this really fantastic discussion. And I'll try to be brief. For me, 3 big challenges really stood out that were shared. I think firstly, just the fundamental challenge of language. Many outside of this kind of COP compound don't really use just transitions language. And I think in a way that's reflective of the second challenge, which is we're actually at a very early stage of transition right now. It's quite an immature space. And that's reflected in a lot of the discussion we heard around the financing gaps that we're seeing, right? Investment plans are still general in many countries. Finance is slow to filter down to that local level. Indonesia and other emerging developing economies still really pushing for their ambitious renewable targets. It's still a discussion quite dominated by energy. We're not yet seeing that really expand to agriculture, to built environment, to manufacturing, and so many other sectoral pathways. Good intentions not always matching realities yet. We've seen, I think, cautionary tales where that's played out in really adverse ways. And top-down approaches really kind of being the state of play right now. We need to see so much more true co-design and co-creation in the way transition decision-making is happening. And we need business especially to really ask itself how it knows that that co-creation is happening, right? Really have that honest conversation internally and then really be able to show that externally. Third, I think that reflects the need to be having the right conversations. We heard a lot about the multi-dimensional nature of this transition challenge, and there's no room for it to be a linear like-for-like energy replacement or sectoral transition. It has to be transformational, and that requires fully multi-stakeholder approaches. So those were some of the top challenges that really came through for me. I had more opportunities, in fact, that I really picked up on, which is encouraging to have that majority come through. Firstly, I think business has such an essential role in that localization imperative facing so many emerging and developing economies, right? Diversification is the opportunity, and business is one of the key drivers for that. So seeing that engaged with, I think, much more explicitly in these kinds of conversations, not assuming that business will play its role, but really strategically driving that conversation at the national and local level. That requires very holistic approaches, and we heard a lot about that. So transition in, yes, but also paired with responsible exit, looking at coal closure, but also economic diversification. This isn't just a decarb conversation. It needs to be coupled and sort of thought through along with adaptation, with circularity, nature-based solutions, and really taking that systemic approach and reflecting that just transitions is fundamentally transboundary. It cannot be
arbitrarily contained within national or defined borders. And I think business offers a new way of reframing that conversation because of very fundamentally globalized value chains. And again, just really grappling with that role of business. And that requires smart strategies. We heard a lot about the way South Africa has really pragmatically grappled with that and come up with ways of, I think, being catalytic in how to drive capital and investment, but linking that to really realistic financing strategies and kind of using the component parts to leverage the whole. And that reflects, I think, something really promising demonstrated in this conversation, which is how much different economies are learning and sharing from each other. And we're seeing that in play right now. I think most repeated and underlined again and again is the need for ground up, bottom up approaches and ensuring that it's really community led and that communities are supported with the capacity and resources to share their vision, to be given space and seat at the tables, to deploy that within the decisions being made. But that has to be a space that is created. They have the voice, but it's often blocked from those conversations. And again, that comes down to that knowing and showing demonstration that we need to see from business and government and decision-making seats. Lastly, I think just the importance of skills and training as, of course, the imperative of net zero, and business, again, being in really that driver's seat for unlocking that. We heard a lot about women and girls throughout this conversation, and that, I think, here is a really historically untapped resource that cannot persist and will just be a huge missed opportunity without it. So I'll finish with 3 things I didn't hear, but certainly in our conversations, I think are essential. One is the importance of confidence building. And I think that comes back to, the early stage of transition we're at. And affected stakeholders really need to see quick wins. They need to see that they have opportunities that they can benefit from. And the more that I think different leaders and decision makers can demonstrate that in a sustained way, the more swiftly we'll move toward net zero in an inclusive, fair, and just manner. Second is quality control. We've heard so much about the need for transitions to be very place-based and context-specific, but surely that can't mean that it's absent of all guardrails and, there are no red lines below which people can fall without accountability, and also that there isn't a gold standard to strive for. So we need to see, I think, that in order to really achieve the kind of replicability that we want to see at scale. Third and final, I suppose, is maybe an obvious point, but justice is not a common language, I would say, in corporate cultures. Human rights, in fact, is. And there are a lot of existing international standards, namely the guiding principles on business and human rights, that have been deployed the last 20 years by industry across sectors and value chains, across contexts. And there is significant learning that comes from that gets you a very far way down the just transition pathway as a company. And we don't have time to reinvent those wheels. So really encourage all actors and leaders here to engage with those international standards and then lean into the remaining gaps and challenges that they don't answer. So thank you so much again, everyone, to our wonderful speakers. This has been hugely stimulating. We hope you'll continue the conversation moving forward. Take care.